I don't need you to date for my sake, Noel said, 6 years old and seated in his wheelchair, and in that moment Graham felt himself shatter all over again. He'd already lost his wife. Was he about to lose his son too? Graham didn't need someone to love him. What he needed was someone who would see this boy, not his wheelchair, not his pity, and recognize the bright spark in his eyes when he talked about his wheeled rocket. And then, on an afternoon that seemed destined to mean nothing, she walked in. No makeup, no introductions. She carried only a single dried flower and a gaze that missed nothing. There are losses that make no sound. They only silently steal every echo from a home once filled with laughter. 3 years ago, Graham Whitaker stood before 2 hospital doors. On one side, confirmation of death. On the other, his 6-month-old son alive but unable to walk. That was the day his world split into no fanfare. No warning, just the chilling whisper of a pen signing his name beneath the medical report. Before then, Graham epitomized success. A tailored gray suit, a sleek black McLaren, and an office overlooking downtown Palo Alto. The numbers he tapped into his keyboard each morning could once sway the markets. But after that fateful collision on the rain-slicked highway, he walked away as if he'd never existed. He sold his shares, disbanded his team, tore down every trophy photo from the walls, and left California. No press conference, no headlines. There remained only Graham, no longer a CEO, and Noel, the child who would never take his first steps. They moved to a small seaside town in South Carolina, where the waves lapped like a whisper and passers-by did not recognize him. Their rented 2-bedroom cottage looked out over the ocean. Graham loved mornings there not for the sunrise, but because it was the only time each day when Noel would smile in his sleep. That 6-year-old boy, with clear eyes and a smile that lightened any heart, lived in his own world where rockets could roll without lifting off, and wheels could roll all the way to Mars. Noel's body was still, but his imagination knew no bounds. Graham never sought to replace his wife. Yet after nearly 2 years, watching his son converse with toys that gave no answer, he began to think differently. Not because he was lonely, but because the boy deserved someone besides his father. Someone who'd ask, "What did you dream of today?" Someone who wouldn't glance at him as a burdensome duty. He started saying yes to introductions, but never used his real name. He'd show up in a worn cotton shirt, paint-splattered sneakers from art time with his son, and drive an old sedan whose air conditioner barely worked, yet always on time. Noel came along because Graham had no nanny, and because he wanted to see whether anyone would truly see his son before they saw him. Women came and went. None stayed past a single coffee. They began with polite enthusiasm questions about Graham's work, why he lived in a small town. They spoke of hobbies, books, podcasts. But their gazes almost never lingered on Noel. A few asked his age, exchanged a few courteous phrases, but no one ever asked what his favorite color was, or whether rainy days made him sad. Noel never made a fuss. He sat quietly, hands folded on his lap as he sat in his wheelchair, occasionally glancing at his father with a smile that seemed to bolster courage. Yet Graham knew the truth he was watching. He knew when people merely pretended to understand, and he realized very early on that the world was not always ready to see him as a child. One evening, after leaving their 4th cafe outing of the month, Graham wheeled Noel into the parking lot under the blur of neon signs in the rear view. The boy tilted his head and whispered, "Dad, if nobody ever wants to stay, am I the reason?" Graham stopped mid-step. His heart pounded as if struck at its softest point. Noel didn't look at him. He focused on smoothing the sleeve of his shirt, as if afraid to crease the question. Graham said nothing. He bent down and kissed his son's forehead, his lips, brushing the child's skin in a silent apology. Noel did not ask again, but from that day, he sat more still and spoke less, and Graham fell silent more often. Is there someone, somewhere, willing to truly see them not through pity but with genuine tenderness?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Violet and Clay Cafe nestles at the end of a tree-lined street, a peaceful whisper amid the city's clamor. It's neither flashy nor ostentatious. Yet each afternoon, sunlight filters through the windows and spills onto the small wooden tables like honeyed brushstrokes. Graham chose this place not for any special drink, but for its perfect quiet. Here, no one called his name. No one murmured about his wealth, and there were no covert cameras lurking behind the bar. Above all, here Noel loved the pale golden light that bathed his pancakes. That day, as on every previous date, Graham arrived 15 minutes early. He sat at the window table, wheeled Noel into the seat opposite, and hastily wiped away the lingering paint flecks on his shirt sleeve. The boy remained obedient as ever, but since that fateful question, something had drained from his eyes. No eagerness, only hollow expectation. Graham exhaled softly as he checked his phone. Today's woman was described as a dynamic marketing professional, nature lover, and student of numerology. She'd arrived 5 minutes late and sent only a single word: parking. But the first person to cross their path wasn't her. Riley Dawson passed by as she did every day, carrying a silver tray of tea, wisps of steam curling from thin porcelain cups. Her hair was tied high, a few curls escaping to frame her forehead. Her heels showed slight wear, and her apron bore a faint tea stain, yet every movement was poised and deliberate, as if she moved to her own private melody. As she glided past Graham and Noel's table, she slowed not out of curiosity, but as though she'd heard something inaudible to others. Then, without a word of permission or a questioning glance, she reached into her apron pocket, withdrew a single sprig of dried lavender, modest and unadorned, wrapped in a small square of brown paper and tied with a pale purple ribbon. She knelt beside the wheelchair, leveling herself with Noel, neither rushing nor feigning familiarity. She didn't glance at Graham once. For the bravest young man today, her voice wasn't syrupy sweet, but it carried warmth, like an old blanket after a long winter, like a whisper Noel might have believed meant only for him. Noel looked at her, then at the flower, hesitating. His small fingers clenched the wheelchair's armrest, as if unsure whether to trust what had just happened. She waited, without prompting. And it seemed that her patience unlocked something those before her never could. Noel reached out, touched the flower's stem, then carefully accepted it. His eyes glistened, his lips curved in a faint smile. "Thank you, ma'am." His words were soft, almost a whisper, but Graham heard them clearly. And in that brief moment he froze, a gentle tap at a door long sealed. Not because Noel spoke, but because he chose to speak. He wanted to be seen. And today, someone truly did. Riley smiled but said nothing. She only brushed her hand gently against Noel's knee, a silent blessing, then stood and continued toward the counter. No need for Graham's gaze. No need for an invitation to stay. Not a word of small talk. Just a dried flower, a humble bow, and a child finally seen after too many passed him by. Graham watched her go and suddenly held his breath. He knew nothing of her, only that, for the first time in a long while, someone had entered their world with no expectations, offering only genuine kindness. Have you ever met a stranger who, in a single moment, made you believe you were not invisible? Dear viewers, stay tuned for a story that will leave you in awe. Please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see people joining us from all around the world. Graham was used to people entering his life with their personal profiles wrapped up in a few introductory lines where they studied, where they worked, their hobbies, whether they'd be a good fit. They usually tried to convey something: sophistication, maturity, understanding, and for the most part, they did well, but never did anyone truly sit down. Until Riley returned. She didn't come back as a spotlighted protagonist. She returned as if she had always been there among the steaming cups of tea, the neatly folded napkins, and that hush only those who have truly known loneliness don't find unsettling. This time, nobody invited her to sit. She simply stepped out from behind the counter, one hand holding a glass of lemonade, the other briskly brushing a coffee stain from her apron, then approached Noel and Graham as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Noel was talking about a spaceship he had drawn yesterday. His excitement was cautious, as if he'd grown accustomed to no one ever hearing his story through to the end. But Riley listened. She nodded at just the right moments, leaning forward so she wouldn't miss a single detail. She didn't interrupt with hollow praises. She asked Noel about planets made of bubble gum, whether his crew carried butter cookies, and how a rocket could roll on wheels without tumbling through space. Noel laughed out loud, a full, clear, lingering laugh. He no longer stared at the floor or avoided eye contact. He looked straight at Riley, his eyes shining with new color. Graham sat there, saying nothing. He simply watched, quietly, as if afraid that a too heavy breath might make this moment dissolve like foam. This wasn't the first time he'd seen his son laugh, but it was the first time he saw him laugh because of someone other than himself, and it left him both grateful and shaken. Riley didn't ask Graham what he did for a living. She didn't comment on his worn shoes or the faded watch, his late wife's final gift. She showed no interest in outer trappings. She seemed to care only about two things: a boy talking about rockets, and a father striving to become his entire sky. When Noel's little spoon clinked sharply against the floor, Graham reflexively leaned forward, but Riley was quicker. She didn't wince or make a fuss. She simply bent down, picked up the spoon with a clean napkin, and sat level with the boy. She didn't hand it back immediately. Before placing the spoon on the table, she spoke softly, her voice a thin, comforting thread. Not everyone who is strong can hold everything up, but the brave are those who know how to bend down and pick things up. Noel said nothing, yet in that instant, the boy's shoulders seemed to relax, not from sadness, but as if an invisible burden had been lifted. Those words weren't meant for Graham, but they struck him at his core where he had blamed himself for not keeping his family whole. Riley stood and walked away without waiting for thanks. She didn't seek Graham's gaze. She returned to her tasks, leaving father and son in a space that felt warmer, not in temperature, but because someone had just helped them feel seen. She didn't come to make an impression. There was no need to be remembered as something special. She simply was there, right when she was needed. Perhaps sometimes miracles don't happen under spotlights, but when someone bends to pick up a fallen spoon. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a drink. Then stay tuned, there are more surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you find this story moving so we know you're still here. The little town Graham and Noel chose to hide in was once as quiet as an old painting. No one cared who you were, as long as you knew how to smile and didn't park in the wrong spot. But that silence shattered over a single photograph. It was posted on an entertainment blog, renowned more for sensational headlines than factual reporting. A distant, slightly blurred off-angle shot. In it, Graham sat on a park bench with his hand loosely resting on his son's shoulder. Beside them, Riley leaned down, placing a small cookie on Noel's lap. All three were smiling, a genuine, unposed moment of peace. But the caption read otherwise. Single CEO caught with his country-style server, romance or ruse? And that was all it took. The week that followed was something Riley could never have imagined. Her inbox overflowed with strange messages, some sarcastic compliments, most outright insults, even threats. A few inquired about her price for accompanying the CEO. Others suggested she write a book, then quickly flipped, calling her a social climber. Her workplace ceased to be a safe haven. The manager began regarding her with puzzled frowns. Colleagues steered clear. A few feigned sympathy, only to say things that left her speechless. Well, at least you made the papers, right? But what stole Riley's sleep wasn't strangers' stares. It was the comments aimed at Noel. Someone called him an emotional prop. Another wrote, "Pity is the easiest thing to go viral." Riley read each line with her fists clenched tight. She wasn't weak. Yet with every cruel word, she felt as though each stroke opened a new door to drive needles into the child she'd only just met but already loved, as though he were a part of her unhealed past. She said nothing to Graham. Not a word. No accusations, no complaints. She simply didn't show up for work the next morning. Her personal accounts vanished. Her phone number changed. The apartment she'd occupied was replaced by a small, cramped room in a dilapidated boarding house on the city's outskirts, where the Wi-Fi signal flickered. She drafted a letter, then tore it up. She opened her phone to text, then turned it off. In the end, she left everything as though she'd never existed. A step back, not out of fear for herself, but because she knew that if someone had to suffer in her place, it must never be Noel. "I didn't walk away because I don't care, Graham," she once thought. "But because I care too much, I fear that sweet tenderness in that boy will be torn apart by the world out there, and I'm not strong enough to protect it." Graham didn't understand. He couldn't. No message was ever returned. Nobody knew where she'd gone. In the early days, he convinced himself she might just need time. But as weeks passed, his worry turned into ache, then anger, then fear. Each night, Noel asked him, not with sobs, but in whispers as soft as drifting paper, "Where's Riley, Dad? Did I do something wrong?" Graham had no answer. He'd asked himself the same question when he lost his wife, when his son had to sit in a wheelchair, when everyone had walked away. What did I do wrong to have the world keep taking people from me? The house grew silent again. Noel's wheelchair no longer clinked cheerfully. He didn't tell stories of candy planets. He stayed quiet, watching the rain against the window for long minutes at a time. Graham knew he couldn't let this continue. He no longer wanted to find someone else, not to replace anyone. But because he had come to realize only one person had ever looked at them with eyes that demanded nothing, required no proof. And he was afraid. Afraid he was losing the last chance for love to enter their lives unbidden. When someone disappears not to protect themselves but to protect you, what will you do to bring them back? A light rain fell, neither a downpour nor a thunderstorm, but enough to make everything feel colder than usual. Fine, silky droplets drifted onto the pavement, seeping into coats and then into the heart. Graham pushed Noel along the narrow alley behind the aging apartment block. The rows of buildings seemed to shrink with time, their paint peeling in blotches, windows shuttered tight, balconies draped with clothes nobody bothered to bring in. No one knew they had come. No one had been warned. They simply walked in, as if stepping into an unfinished memory. Noel sat still, hands clutching the one thing he had never let go these past weeks. A tiny withered sprig of lavender whose scent remained only as a faint echo, like someone's silhouette in a dream. But he never dropped it. Not once. Door 3B on the ground floor stood before them. Its paint faded to a muted green, the nameplate worn beyond legibility. Graham halted, gripped the wheelchair handles, and drew a steady breath. He had no speech prepared, no script rehearsed. He'd come not to persuade, but simply to be present. He tapped 3 measured beats on the door, soft yet resolute. Inside, silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, tentative, as if the person within wavered between opening the door or retreating into darkness forever. The door cracked open to reveal Riley. Gone was the neatness of her cafe apron days. Her hair tumbled in strands, eyes reddened, and her shirt looked as though it had been worn for a week straight. But her gaze, the same gentle, steadfast eyes, now drooped with exhaustion, burdened by the weight of her withdrawal. Graham spoke no, "I'm sorry." He didn't recount past events or lay out explanations. He said only one imperfect but heartfelt sentence. "I don't need you to shelter me from the rain. I just need you to stay and walk beside me through it." Riley did not answer at once. Rainwater trickled through her hair, tracing wet lines down cheeks still damp. Then her eyes fell to Noel, the boy to whom she had once given a flower, sitting silent, fingers trembling yet still gripping that lavender, as though it were his sole link to something beautiful. He lifted his head, hesitation in his eyes, voice barely louder than the wind slipping through the doorway. "Miss, if I did something wrong, I'm sorry. But I still keep your flower. My mom loves lavender too." Riley froze as if every barrier she had built to forget shattered in an uncontrolled burst. She knelt, meeting Noel at eye level, slipped her hand to his cheek, then, unable to hold back, wrapped him in an embrace. Her shoulders shook, stifled sobs catching in each breath. She did not weep from weakness, but because someone had held fast to what she had given, held it to the very end. "No one did anything wrong," she whispered. "And your mom would be so proud of how brave you are." Noel said nothing. Yet he tightened his arms around her, not in haste or fear, but the embrace of one once wounded, learning again how to trust. Graham stood beside them, his hands unclenching before he slowly rested one warm palm on Riley's shoulder. He spoke no words, yet that touch carried everything unspoken that he was grateful. Grateful she had returned. Grateful she had not passed by Noel like the others. Grateful she had taught him that even a dried flower still carries its scent. They said no more, no need to. A man, a child, and a woman who once walked away out of love now sat together beneath the damp awning. No one laughed, but the chill had lifted. Not every wound requires words to heal. Some things only need to be touched gently, and at the right moment. Perhaps the most enduring things in this world are not those that blaze brightest, but those someone chooses to keep, even when they seem wilted and gone. Spring arrived softly, as if not to disturb anyone. Charleston seemed to awaken from a long slumber, wildflowers blanketing both sides of the roads, the sky so clear you could see straight into the depths of one's thoughts. 6 months had passed since that rainy afternoon when 3 people rediscovered one another, not through grand speeches but through words they had never dared to speak aloud. Graham did not return to Silicon Valley. He made no statements to the press, did not reopen his company, nor did he embark on any inspirational CEO tour as rumors had claimed. He chose silence, but not stillness. He sold an old house, freed up an investment fund, and quietly funded the construction of the Second Light, a rehabilitation center dedicated to children with disabilities raised by single parents. No flashy billboards, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, just a sunlit building with large windows, wide corridors, and enough space for wheelchairs to make a full turn. There, every child was called by name, not by their medical diagnosis. Each morning began with the question, "Where would you like to fly today?" On opening day, Charleston's sky shone with remarkable brilliance. No rain fell. A gentle breeze fluttered hems of dresses. Everything seemed to keep time for a singular performance where no one played a part, only real people with real wounds and genuine hope. Riley wore a pale blue dress of simple cut, its hem brushing her ankles. Her hair was swept up, a few curls dancing in the breeze. She wore no heavy makeup, only that strange light in her eyes, the kind found in those who have known loss yet still choose love. Noel, in his crisp white shirt and new leg braces, stood backstage with a volunteer. He drew a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly. But his gaze sparkled like the private planet he once dreamed of in stories he wrote himself. When the music began softly, he stepped forward, each step deliberate, a slight tilt, yet brimming with courage. The audience fell silent. No one breathed heavily, as though all were walking with him through each quiver of his knees, through every quickened breath of legs unaccustomed to bearing weight. Then he reached the microphone. His voice was still small but steady. "I used to think I couldn't fly," Noel said, his eyes fixed on the two figures in the front row. "But Miss Riley gave me wings, and Dad helped me believe the wind still blows." A few sniffles rippled through the crowd. Then the hall erupted into applause, tears, and tight embraces, not out of pity, but out of understanding. Graham stepped onto the stage. No notes in hand. No microphone needed. He knelt beneath a glass dome shimmering with light, the clear brightness reminiscent of the first time he saw Riley bend down to pick up that spoon. Reaching into his pocket, he produced a simple silver ring, no gemstone, no brand insignia, just a plain circle, a promise between those who have learned to love without an audience. "The day you gave Noel that sprig of lavender," he said in a low voice, "you didn't know you were planting an entire field of hope. I can't promise there won't be storms, but I promise I will always push the wheelchair if you'll keep walking with me." Riley said nothing. Yet tears brimmed in her eyes, tracing curved paths down her cheeks to the smile on her lips. She nodded ever so lightly. Then, in a whisper meant only for him, "Only if you promise to let me hold the umbrella for you once." Graham smiled a smile not of triumph, but of relief, as though he had just touched the most important thing in his life. And under Charleston's sky that day they clasped each other's hands, three people, one who had lost everything, one who once feared she was not enough, and a child who once believed he could not fly. Now they stood together, not perfect, but perfect for one another, because some gifts need no wrapping, no formal handing over. They only require a life lived truly, so others dare to stay. There are wounds unseen but carried every day. There are losses unspoken but borne with hope that someone gentle enough will understand. And there are people who, without any spotlight, arrive at just the right moment to remind us that authenticity is the world's most precious gift. The story of Graham, Riley, and Noel is not a fairy tale. It is a series of small moments drawn from a challenging life, where kindness needs no fanfare, and love can begin with a single dried flower. If this story made you smile, brought tears, or reminded you of someone who once made you believe in goodness, please leave a comment below and share your feelings. You never know, your words might be the healing balm for someone quietly reading along. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video if you'd like to spread more heart-touching stories like this. We thank you for staying until the very end.